Snow fell thick over the city of Chicago, as if the sky itself was trying to bury every sound. The flakes were round and cold, striking the glass walls of the train station before melting into murky streaks under the flickering yellow light. The digital board on the wall blinked wearily, its red letters as tired as the winter night itself. All departures delayed. The iron benches along the hallway were coated with a thin layer of frost. Most people had already left. Only a few homeless figures huddled in the corners, their breath forming ghostly clouds in the air. On the third bench sat Lena Moore, 26, motionless like a statue. Her gray wool coat was frayed at the shoulders, her thin gloves soaked through. Strands of dark brown hair clung to her damp cheeks. In her arms, she held a small wooden box wrapped in a knitted scarf, the urn containing the ashes of Elliot Moore, the brother who had once been her whole world. She had never called it a box to her. It was a promise that she would take him everywhere he once dreamed of going. The dim light poured over her pale blue eyes, dull and frozen, like a lake sealed under ice. She unlocked her phone with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked at the corner, the battery barely holding on, yet she still pressed play. A violin began to play, fragile, trembling, and heartbreakingly beautiful. The last train home, the final piece Elliot had performed on that fateful night. The sound drifted through the empty station like a wandering soul. Lena bit her lip until it bled, but the tears still came, freezing on her skin. She whispered to no one, her voice quivering in the cold. "I tried to make it on time. I really did." A gust of wind lashed through the doorway, dragging icy snowflakes across the floor. At the far end of the hall, a man stepped in, a long charcoal trench coat, black wool scarf at his neck. He brushed the snow from his shoulders, his breath clouding in the air. Dr. Adrian Vale, 34, had just left North Shore Hospital after a 14-hour shift. His face was drawn, the hard lines of his jaw shadowed with exhaustion, his dark brown eyes rimmed with fatigue. He moved like someone who didn't want to go home, because there was no real home waiting for him. Outside, an ambulance siren wailed down Michigan Avenue, fading into the distance. He flinched, the sound reminding him of the flatline that had echoed just hours earlier, when the 12-year-old boy he'd operated on didn't make it. For the first time in years, Adrian felt his hands tremble. He sat on a metal bench near the heater, pulling off his gloves, rubbing his palms together for warmth. Then he heard it, the violin, a thin thread of sound, fragile and haunting, cutting through the blizzard. He looked up. A few seats away, the young woman was hunched over, holding her phone to her chest as if afraid it might shatter. Her small shoulders trembled, not from the cold but from exhaustion. He stood and walked closer, stopping a few steps away, careful not to startle her. "Beautiful piece," he said, his voice low and rough after a day without speaking. Lena looked up. Her blue eyes flashed with wary light, as if a stranger had just touched the wound she'd been hiding. "It's the last song he ever played," she answered softly but firmly. Silence. The station seemed to hold its breath, only the wind whistling through the doors and the dying notes of music filling the emptiness. Adrian glanced at the box in her arms, and he understood. In that unspoken way only those who have lost someone can. "You shouldn't be out here in this weather," he said, his tone gentler now. "There's nowhere else to go. You'll freeze." "Maybe that's fine." Her last words made him frown. He looked around. The waiting hall was deserted, the coffee stand shuttered, windows fogged with frost. No trains were coming tonight. No one would come to save her. He took off his thick coat and draped it over her shoulders. She tensed, but the warmth spreading through the fabric made her pause. "What are you doing?" "Keeping you alive until your train actually comes." She gave a faint, broken laugh. "It won't." Right then, the electronic board flickered one last time before going dark. The final message glowed red across the screen. "All departures canceled due to blizzard." Their eyes met in the flickering light. He exhaled slowly, his voice deep but calm. "There's a diner across the street. They stay open during storms. Let's get you warm." Lena looked at him, the stranger with the weary face, the cold demeanor, and the quietly worried eyes. She hesitated, caught between fear and exhaustion. Finally, she nodded. He smiled, just a small, fleeting smile, but enough to soften the storm outside. They stepped out together. Snow fell so thick it seemed the world had shrunk to only two sets of footprints walking side by side. Behind them, the departure board went completely dark. No train would leave that night. The train never came, but fate had just begun to move. Hey, hey, Soul Stories fam! We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The glass door closed behind them. The wind chime gave a faint jingle, delicate like the sound of memory stretching thin. Warm air from the small coffee shop spilled out, wrapping around their trembling bodies. A flickering neon sign outside cast a soft amber glow through the blizzard. Open until the storm ends! Inside, time itself seemed to hesitate. Not quite still, not quite moving. Only the howl of the wind slipping through the cracks, the scent of roasted coffee mingled with a faint whiff of burnt waffles, brick walls, low-hanging lamps, dark wooden tables. A dusty radio hummed an old jazz tune, Autumn Leaves. Behind the counter, a barista in a beanie wiped glasses with slow, rhythmic motions, as if unsure whether the night would ever end. Adrian pulled a chair out for Lena. Polite, restrained, he struggled out of his overcoat, set it aside, then gestured to the barista. 2 Americanos, 1 black, 1 sweet. Lena looked around. The cafe was small, warm, but empty, just the two of them and the barista. The light reflected off the frost-painted windows, turning their silhouettes into a duet of shadows that didn't quite touch. She rubbed her cold hands together. Her fingers were slender, calloused where a violin bow had once rested. The coat he draped over her shoulders still carried the faint scent of antiseptic and cedarwood. Clean, cold, but safe. Maybe I should thank you, she said softly, closing her eyes as the coffee cup landed before her, for not letting me freeze to death at the station. No need, he replied, voice low, tired. I was just passing by. A pause, wind slammed against the glass. Lena smiled faintly, bitterly. Most things start that way, don't they? Someone just passing by. Adrian looked up. The yellow light cast shadows across his face. Sharp jawline, tired eyes, the kind of expression that belonged to someone used to living behind glass and pain. You were at the station because, she asked. Steam rose from her cup, fogging the air between them. Because I couldn't stay there any longer, she said. I attended the memorial concert for my brother, Elliot Moore. He was a musician. I'm sorry, Adrian said automatically, the reflex of someone trained to say it. Don't be, she murmured, running her fingers around the rim of her cup. They turned his death into a fundraiser, his face on every poster, every live stream, sponsors, interviews, hashtags. No one cared about his music, just the tragedy. I walked out before the lights went down. Her gaze drifted into emptiness. Her voice trembled. He used to say art only matters when it's honest, but tonight, it felt like they buried him twice. Adrian stayed silent. He stared into his cup. Black, bitter, no sugar, the smell reminding him of hospital corridors. He spoke finally, quietly. I know that feeling. I lost someone too, a boy, 12 years old, heart disease. I thought I could fix it. I couldn't. Lena looked up. Her eyes met his, the eyes of a man who carried wounds beneath a white coat. How do you keep going? She whispered. You don't, he said after a pause. You just show up the next day, hoping your hands will shake a little less. The air between them deepened, like a trench carved by grief. Outside, snow fell heavily, the storm whispering in restless swirls. Inside, the steady hum of the coffee machine filled the silence, the heartbeat of someone still trying to survive. They sat there for a long time without saying a word. Some sorrows, after all, can only be shared through silence. Lena stirred her coffee, watching the dark spirals deepen, her own private funeral. Adrian stared at his hands, the same hands that once trembled with helplessness, and realized that tonight they'd been warm enough to save someone from the cold. Sometimes, Adrian said quietly, We lose someone not because we failed them, but because they were meant to teach us how fragile we really are. She looked up, her voice soft, almost floating. In the dim golden light, his face seemed different, not cold anymore, but touched by a gentle sadness, like a man learning how to forgive himself. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "It's tragic," he corrected. "Maybe it's both," she said, and smiled faintly. The coffee had gone cold, but its scent lingered. Bitter, rich, real. A click echoed. The ceiling lights flickered, then went out. The cafe sank into darkness. Outside, the snowstorm sighed across the roof, like the breathing of lost souls. The barista's quiet voice broke through. "Power's out again." He placed a small candle on their table. The frail flame danced, lighting two unfamiliar faces. One who'd lost faith, the other who'd lost everything. In that frozen night, surrounded by wandering souls, only that tiny flame remained. The first warmth they had ever shared, and perhaps the beginning of something neither of them yet knew how to name. Morning in Chicago woke beneath a gray blanket of snow. Outside the window, the city was drowned in silence. The streets lay buried, turning every sound into something distant and fading. Inside the cafe, the cold crept through the cracks of the door, mingling with the stale scent of coffee left from the night before. Lena stirred awake on an old leather chair, still wrapped in a thick coat that smelled faintly of antiseptic. The dim light from the emergency lamp cast soft shadows across her face, glinting on her wet lashes and the faint smudge of mascara beneath her eyes. The room was empty. The barista was gone, the chairs neatly stacked. On the table, beside a cold cup of coffee and a napkin marked with pencil scribbles, lay a business card. Dr. Adrian Vale, Cardiac Surgery, North Shore Medical Center. If you ever need warmth, Dr. Vale. The handwriting slanted slightly, neat but uncertain, as if written by someone unaccustomed to leaving notes. Lena picked up the card, her fingers trembling. From the cold, or perhaps something else. She glanced around. Only faint footprints remained on the wooden floor. A hollow ache spread through her chest, unfamiliar and uncomfortable. She folded the card, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stepped outside. The blizzard had paralyzed the city. Traffic lights blinked yellow. Cars were half buried beneath white drifts. Lena trudged through several blocks, clutching the small wooden box in her arms. Her apartment sat in an old building on Wabash Avenue. Third floor, narrow hallway, the smell of paint and dampness mixing with fried food from the neighbor's kitchen. She unlocked the door. The hinges groaned as cold air rushed in. The apartment was tiny. A single sofa, a violin stand by the wall, and an old upright piano topped with a framed photograph of Elliot Moore. He smiled in the picture, bright-eyed, hair tousled, violin in hand. Lena placed the wooden box on the table and unwrapped the knitted scarf that was wrapped around it. Inside were the last fragments of his life, a worn music journal, a broken pencil, and a few half-finished scores, their edges singed, remnants of the car accident she never wanted to remember. She opened the notebook. The faint scent of old paper and ash rose up. On the final page, written in his rough scrawl, "The last train home, unfinished." The note stopped mid-measure, like the breath of someone who had tried to finish something and never could. Lena rested her hand on the piano keys and played a few chords. The sound was discordant. Tears spilled before she could stop them. "You never got to finish it," she whispered. "Neither did I." She sat there for a long time until the pale light of noon bled through the curtains. The storm outside hadn't ceased. Then she remembered the name on the card. Dr. Adrian Vale. Her heart tightened with a strange, unnameable feeling. He was the only one who'd stayed with her that night, the first to listen without asking, the only person who hadn't pitied her. She grabbed her phone and typed his name into the search bar. Within seconds, results flooded the screen. Dr. Adrian Vale, Chief of Cardiac Surgery, North Shore Medical Center. Scrolling further, she opened an old article. A photo of Adrian among his colleagues, face serious beneath the headline, "Groundbreaking Surgery Saves Musician's Life. Dr. Adrian Vale leads the team." Her breath caught. The accompanying photo was of Elliot Moore. Lena blinked hard. her pulse racing as her eyes found the line beneath the picture. Patient, Elliot Moore, 29, survived cardiac arrest during performance. Surgery led by Dr. Adrian Vale. Patient passed away 6 months later due to complications. She dropped the phone. The world tilted. No, no, it can't be. Her hands shook violently. Memories flooded back. The violin, the ambulance siren, the doctor's voice saying, "We're doing everything we can." She collapsed into the chair, her heartbeat pounding like a trapped bird. The man who had pulled her from the snow had once tried to save her brother and failed. She went to the cabinet and pulled out the medical file her mother had sent months ago. On the first page, printed clearly, attending surgeon, Dr. Adrian Vale. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping the folder. "The man who bought me coffee," she whispered, "was the one who couldn't save my brother." The air in the apartment felt heavy and unmoving. Outside, the wind howled, snowflakes beating against the window, as if trying to erase everything. Her eyes fell on the unfinished sheet music, scattered notes like broken stitches across her heart. "You knew him, didn't you, Elliot?" she murmured, voice trembling. "You knew him, and you trusted him." Tears welled up again, but this time they carried more than grief. There was anger now, confusion, and a question she could barely breathe out. If the one who saved you was also the one who once failed, could you ever forgive them? Or yourself? She closed the notebook and stood, eyes glistening yet steadier than before. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside that small apartment, the last train home began to play again. Soft, uneven, and aching, as though her very heart had taken up the melody itself. North Shore Hospital, an afternoon as gray as ash. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained heavy, like the storm had only paused to let people catch their breath. The corridor on the 8th floor stretched long and sterile, its pale walls gleaming under white light that felt colder than winter itself. The echo of rubber soles tapped rhythmically across the polished floor. Lena pushed through the glass door, clutching a folder tight against her chest. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from anger burning hot in her veins. She had waited all night, waited to see him, to ask the question that had haunted her for 6 years. "Why did you let my brother die?" The receptionist looked up as Lena approached, gray wool coat dusted with snow, hair hastily tied back, eyes red but fierce. "I'm here to see Dr. Adrian Vale," she said, her voice rough and dry as gravel. The receptionist scanned the list, then nodded. "He just finished surgery. Room 8B? But you can't—" Lena didn't wait to hear the rest. She walked straight ahead. The door to the break room creaked open. A dim yellow light spilled across a man washing his hands under a stream of stainless steel water. It ran clear and steady, reflecting the veins on his hands, the faint scent of disinfectant lingering in the air. Adrian looked up through the mirror. Surprise flickered, then froze. "Lena!" She stood there, folder in hand, breath uneven, coat half open. "You operated on him," she said, voice rigid. "Elliot Moore. You were his surgeon." Silence fell, so complete it swallowed the sound of running water. He turned off the tap slowly and dried his hands with a paper towel. His face didn't change, but his shoulders lowered slightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was 6 years ago." "You remember him?" "I remember every patient I lose." The words hit her like a slap. "Lose," she snapped. "That's what you call it? Lose?" She threw the folder onto the table. Papers scattered, photos, test results, surgical reports, spilling like evidence of a crime no one wanted to claim. "He was 29. He played the violin. He was my brother. And you stood there looking down at him, pretending you could save him." Adrian didn't move. He didn't defend himself. He just stood there, eyes deep, weary, and unbearably calm. "I didn't pretend," he said, his voice low, controlled. "We tried everything. The graft failed, and his heart—" "Stop!" she cut in sharply. "Don't make it sound like science. He wasn't a procedure. He was a person." The sound of her voice echoed against the metal walls. A nurse walking past peeked in briefly, then turned away. Lena took a step closer. "Do you know what it's like," she said, To sit in a waiting room and hear someone say he didn't make it? To watch a doctor walk out, say sorry, and vanish like you never existed? Her voice cracked. That doctor was you. Adrian swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He took a hesitant step forward, but she stepped back. You should have told me, she said, tears spilling over. That night in the coffee shop, you knew who I was. No, he said quickly, almost pleading. I didn't. I swear I didn't recognize your name until after you left. I only remembered when I saw the file again. Liar. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. You said you lost someone. You were talking about him, weren't you? Adrian didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was confession enough. You don't get to be the hero, she said, voice trembling but sharp. You don't get to buy me coffee and make me believe you care. He stared at her for a long time before speaking softly. Lena, if I could trade my hands to bring him back, I would. She laughed through her tears bitterly. That's the thing, Dr. Vale. You can't. A long silence followed. Outside, snow began to fall again, faint and slow, white light seeping through the glass like drifting ash. Adrian bent down, gathering the papers she'd thrown. His hands trembled slightly as he stacked them. He was special, he said softly. When he woke up from the first surgery, he thanked me, not for saving him, but for letting him play again. He said he had one last song to finish. He looked up. Did he? Lena stood still. Her lips parted, but no words came. No, she whispered. He never finished it. Then let me help you finish it, Adrian said. It's the only way I can make it right. She looked at him, tears glistening, but her eyes hard. You can't fix everything with your hands, doctor. She turned toward the door. He called after her, voice breaking. Lena. She stopped but didn't look back. You said last night, she said hoarsely, that we lose people to learn how fragile we are. Maybe you were right, but I'm not ready to learn that from you. The door closed behind her with a hollow thud that echoed down the white corridor. Adrian stood motionless, clutching the last fallen page, a note scrawled in uneven handwriting. The last train home, unfinished. He gripped it tightly, and for the first time in years, the doctor's eyes filled with tears. Night fell over Chicago in shades of blue and gray, the color of regret. The snow outside had stopped, yet the chill still clung to the window like a memory that refused to fade. In Lena's small apartment, the faint glow of a desk lamp fell across the urn, the old music notebook, and her face, pale, hollow, empty. She sat still before an old silver laptop, fingers gliding lightly across the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, reflecting the redness in her eyes. It wasn't hers. The laptop belonged to Elliot, the brother she still couldn't let go of. Every file, every melody, every photograph within it was a blade she'd spent months avoiding. But tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt she had to face it. The hard drive hummed faintly as it came to life. Folders appeared, concert drafts, studio mixes, letters. Lena hesitated, then opened the last one. Among hundreds of sent emails, there was a single dimmed folder, Drafts 1, one unsent message. 2, Dr. Adrian Vale, subject, thank you. Her breath caught. The cursor blinked. When she clicked it open, the first lines appeared. Dear Dr. Vale, I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm the violinist who went into cardiac arrest on stage 6 months ago. Lena's lips parted slightly. She kept reading, every word slicing through time, through her heart. They said I was lucky to survive, but I don't think it was luck. You were there. You fixed what was broken, even if only for a while. The truth is, I can feel my body failing again. But every morning, when I lift my violin, I think of your hands. Steady, gentle, precise. The hands that gave me 6 more months to play. 6 more months to say the things I could never say. A tear dropped onto the keyboard. She read to the very end. If you ever doubt yourself one day, please remember me. You did not fail. You gave me music again. Elliot. Lena leaned back, her hands clutching her head. Everything she had carried, the anger, the grief, melted like snow under morning light. Adrian hadn't failed. He had saved Elliot. Not forever, but long enough for her brother to live 6 more months, to play his final song, to laugh, to love, and to teach her that music only matters when it's shared. A sound escaped her. Not a sob, but something raw and human, the sound of someone finally understanding. No one truly fails when they have given a piece of themselves to keep someone else alive. She looked back at the screen. The letter remained there, unsent, a message suspended between two worlds, the one who had gone and the one who never knew he'd been thanked. He gave me 6 more months to play, Lena whispered softly, almost smiling through her tears. And I almost hated him for that. She rose, pulling on her coat and boots. The room grew smaller behind her, the faint hum of the laptop fan like the slow breathing of someone finally released. North Shore Hospital glowed under the nightlights. Fluorescent lamps reflected off the glass corridors, mirroring her figure as she walked down the hall. The night nurse looked up when she approached. "I'm looking for Dr. Vale," Lena said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's still in the OR. Late surgery," the nurse replied. "You can wait there." Lena nodded and leaned against the wall, hands clasped tightly. The sterile white light made her look almost translucent. Time stretched, taut as a thread between two hearts that had once lost each other. Then the doors swung open. Adrian stepped out, white coat stained with a trace of blood, eyes tired, hair disheveled, yet still carrying that gaze she could never forget. Deep, weary, kind. He froze when he saw her. "Lena!" She took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper but clear. "I found something. From Elliot." He didn't move, as if afraid the moment might shatter if he breathed too loudly. She held up her phone, the screen glowing between them, washing their faces in blue light. He read. He didn't speak. Only his eyes began to glisten. "He wanted you to know," Lena said softly. "He didn't blame you. He thanked you. He said you gave him 6 more months to play." A tear rolled down his cheek. For the first time before her, he wasn't a doctor, not a man burdened by skill or failure, but simply someone who had just been forgiven. "I never saw this," he whispered. "He never sent it." "But he wrote it," she replied. "That's enough." They stood there in the empty hallway, surrounded by white light and the distant hum of ventilators. The space between them began to close, not with apologies but with understanding. Lena stepped closer. "I hated you," she said, her voice trembling, "because I needed someone to blame. But now I think my brother didn't need to be saved from death. He needed to be saved from silence. And you gave him that." Adrian shook his head gently. "No," he said quietly. "He gave it to me." She smiled, small, weary, but warm. "Then maybe it's time both of us listened." Outside, the city lights flickered against the hospital glass. There was no longer a line between guilt and grace, only reflection. In her hands, the phone screen still glowed with the final line of the letter that had never been sent. "If you ever doubt yourself one day, please remember me." Adrian stared at those words for a long time, then whispered, "I will." The night wind swept through the city like the sigh of a winter that refused to leave. A thin blanket of snow covered the steel bridge stretched across the Chicago River, golden lights casting long streaks on the half-thawed water. Beneath, broken chunks of ice drifted slowly, bumping into each other with the sound of distant whispers. Lena stood at the center of the bridge, her beige coat wrapped tightly around her. Her breath turned to pale smoke. In her hands, she held an old music notebook. The Last Train Home, its pages worn, edges yellowed, but still faintly scented with ink. She looked down at the water, listening in her mind to the piece that was never finished. The final notes ended mid-phrase, like a heart-stopping pause between two beats. In the distance, footsteps echoed. Slow, steady. She turned. Adrian was walking toward her, his dark coat dusted with snow, fatigue written across his face, but his eyes, deeper, gentler than ever. They stopped just a few steps apart. Neither spoke. The wind passed through, scattering snowflakes between them like a sheer veil. Lena broke the silence, her voice hoarse, weak, but honest. "I blamed you because I didn't know who else to blame." Adrian inhaled deeply, His hands clenched in his coat pockets, then loosened as he looked up, gaze calm but firm. And I blame myself because I didn't know how to forgive. A moment passed. Snow settled softly on their shoulders, cold and weightless, but neither brushed it away. Only their heartbeats remained, slow, synchronized in silence. When Elliot died, she continued, I stopped playing. I thought music was what killed him. All the late nights, all that pressure. But maybe it was what kept him alive. He told me that, Adrian said, his voice barely more than a confession. He said he didn't fear dying. He just feared not being heard. Lena closed her eyes, a tear mixed with the falling snow. He was heard, she whispered, just not soon enough. A gust of wind swept across the bridge, sending snowflakes flying like glass shards. She opened the notebook. The pages fluttered. Then she held it out to him. Finish this with me, she said, voice trembling, but sure. He started it with you. Let's finish it together. Adrian looked at the notebook in her hands, something so fragile and yet sacred. He took it, his fingertips brushing the last note, the unfinished mark of Elliot's shaky handwriting. He looked up and smiled softly. You sure you want to do this with someone who can't even hold a note? She laughed through her tears. Then I'll play and you'll listen. That's all music needs. The wind calmed. Beneath the bridge, the river reflected the city lights, drifting like the city's quiet breath. Lena reached into her coat and pulled out a small violin, its case frayed at the corners. She placed it on her shoulder and raised the bow. The first note rang out, thin, cold, but real. The sound drifted into the wind, threading through the iron beams, blending with the sighs of the night. Adrian stood still, eyes fixed on her. She played slowly, note by note, restoring the melody Elliot never finished. At the final passage, she paused, glancing at him. Your turn, she said. He smiled faintly. I don't have an instrument. You have a heartbeat, she replied. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and stood beside her. She began to play again, and this time he placed his hand over his chest, letting his heartbeat fall into rhythm with the song. She looked at him and smiled softly. Now it's finished. The last note dissolved into the wind. No applause, no audience, just two souls standing on a bridge in the snow, between the past and the present. That bridge, the beginning of forgiveness. Silent, but brighter than any concert hall. Lena lowered the violin and turned to him. He said you gave him 6 more months to play. Maybe now, you gave me a lifetime to heal. Adrian looked at her, his eyes warmer now. Maybe we both got saved tonight. They stood together. No embrace, no more words. Only the snow continued to fall, gently as if the sky too was finally letting go. In the distance, the sound of a train whistle echoed, low, drawn out, rolling across the snowy valley. Lena turned to him, smiling. The last train home. Adrian nodded. Finally arrived. The night in Chicago was strangely quiet. The snow had stopped, yet the air still carried that clean, cold fragrance, the scent of a city washed after a storm. Adrian's apartment was on the 14th floor, overlooking the icy shimmer of the river below. When Lena stepped inside, warmth spread from the heating vents, mingling with the scent of pine wood and roasted coffee. The space wasn't as luxurious as she'd imagined. It was neat, simple, a little lonely. Among the shelves stacked with medical journals, one small section revealed an unexpected world. A few old sheet music folders, a metronome box, and a black and white photograph of a young man sitting by a piano. She leaned closer. The young man in the photo was Adrian, 10 years younger, smiling with a brightness she had never seen in him before. You used to play? She asked softly, as if afraid her voice might disturb the air. He paused, turning toward her, a flicker of shyness crossing his eyes. Yeah, he said with a faint smile. A lifetime ago. Before med school, before the white coats, before I thought saving lives only meant fixing hearts. Lena glanced around. In the corner stood a piano, its surface dust-covered, the ivory keys yellowed with age. She walked over and brushed her fingers across the lid. A small cloud of dust rose into the warm light. It's beautiful, she said. It's tired, he replied, half joking, like its owner. She smiled, then opened her violin case and pulled out a sheet of music. Maybe we should wake it up. He froze. In his eyes, there was a hint of fear, the kind that comes from losing something once loved and not daring to touch it again. I haven't played in years, he murmured. Then tonight's a good night to start. Lena sat on a small stool beside the piano, placing the worn notebook, The Last Train Home, on the music stand. The desk lamp shone across the page, illuminating Elliot's handwriting, the final line of notes, still unfinished. Adrian sat down at the keys, his fingers pressed gently against middle C. The first sound emerged, soft, hesitant, like the breath of a soul waking up after a long silence. Lena lifted her violin, took a slow breath. Then they began. The first notes stumbled out, fragile and uneven. Adrian played carefully, each chord cautious and deliberate, while Lena followed with trembling bow strokes. Elliot's melody came alive again, but not as it once was. It now carried the breath of two others, two people who had once been angry, who had grieved, and who were learning, note by note, what forgiveness truly meant. The piano was reason, steady, meticulous, arranging each chord like a surgeon, stitching a heart with sound. The violin was emotion, tender, weeping across the strings like tears spilling over ivory keys. And when those two voices met, the music became something words could never reach. Lena closed her eyes and let the melody guide her. She no longer thought of death, of loss, or of what could have been. In her mind, her brother sat quietly in the corner, smiling, listening as they finished the story he never got to write. Adrian, too, closed his eyes. His hands trembled slightly, but each note he played was steady, as though he were mending invisible wounds between two beating hearts. Each chord, each phrase felt like a pulse returning to life. When the piece reached its crescendo, Lena opened her eyes and met his. Neither spoke. They both understood. This was no longer Elliot's song alone. It was theirs. The song of two souls who had learned that forgiveness doesn't come from logic or tears, but from the moment your heart dares to listen again. The violin soared, high, clear, luminous. The piano followed, deep, warm, like water cradling fire. And when the final note echoed into silence, no one could tell whose sound belonged to whom. The music, pure, aching, but peaceful, lingered in the air before fading into nothingness. The room was silent again. Only the lamplight glimmered on the piano keys, glistening with tears. Lena lowered her violin, taking a trembling breath. She hadn't realized she was crying. Adrian turned to her, saw the tears on her cheeks, and suddenly understood that his own were falling too. "I guess," he whispered, "that's how it was meant to end." She wiped her face and smiled faintly. "No," she said, "that's how it was meant to begin." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that feels like a sigh. "You sound like him." "Maybe he's somewhere here," she replied, whispering the notes. They sat there side by side in the living room, beneath the golden light. Outside, snow began to fall again, tiny gentle flakes like winter's late blessing. After a long quiet moment, Adrian stood and opened the window. A gust of cold air swept in, carrying the scent of fresh snow. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Lena tilted her head. From far away, somewhere between the wind and the city, came the faint sound of a train whistle, distant and low, a farewell drifting through the night. She smiled. "The last train home." He nodded. "He made it." She stepped closer, placing her hand softly over his, warm after the music they just played. "And we did too." In that moment, they didn't need any more words. No declarations, no promises, no apologies. Only the music, still playing quietly inside them. A new rhythm, a song rewritten not in notes, but in kindness. North Shore Hospital glowed in the night again. But this time, Adrian didn't walk in like a doctor. He ran. His coat trailed behind him, shoes striking the cold tile floor. Lena followed close behind, clutching her bag, her heartbeat pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Adrian, what happened?" He didn't answer. He just handed her his phone. The message was short, but enough to drain the blood from his face. "Your mother collapsed. Cardiac arrest. ICU." Lena saw his hands tremble as he put the phone away. The same hands that once opened another's chest with precision. The same hands that had revived hearts that had stopped. Now they shook as if he no longer believed in them. In the isolation ward, the red "Do Not Enter" light glared above the door. They stopped in front of the glass. Inside, a small silver-haired woman lay amidst a forest of wires and machines. The EKG flickered faintly, slow, weak, each pulse a fragile whisper of life. Adrian stood frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe. No longer a doctor, no longer the one who saved others, just a son afraid of losing his mother. Lena saw his shoulders trembling. She had never seen him like this. The man who once faced death with clinical calm, now unraveling over a single heartbeat. "It's the same thing," he said, voice hoarse and cracked. "Same arrhythmia, the same condition I've spent my whole career studying." He gave a hollow laugh. "I can fix strangers, Lena, but I can't fix her." She didn't know what to say, so she stepped closer and laid her hand over his. His palm was cold, slick with sweat. "Adrian," she whispered, "you once told me I was stronger than I thought. Maybe you are too." He looked up, eyes red and sleepless. "I can't lose her too," he said. "Not again. Not after Elliot. Not after everything." She shook her head gently. "You didn't lose Elliot. He lives in the music we finished. And her?" She looked into the ICU, where the woman still breathed faintly. "She's still fighting, because you taught her how." A draft swept through the hallway, rustling the white curtains like the ghosts of wandering souls. Lena tightened her grip on his hand. "You're not just a doctor," she said softly. "You're a son. Let yourself be one." A doctor stepped out from the ICU. Adrian moved instantly. "How is she?" "Stable for now," the doctor said. "She's on assisted rhythm. If her heart responds to pacing, there's a chance." Adrian nodded, turned away and pressed his forehead against the wall. Lena came up behind him, resting a hand on his shoulder. She could hear his ragged breathing, his heartbeat thrumming fast and loud. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think strength meant never breaking down. But maybe real strength is when you finally do, and still keep breathing." He looked at her, eyes wet but glimmering with a faint, fragile light. "You talk like you've been through med school." "No," she smiled faintly. "I just went through hell." For the first time that night, he laughed, softly, weakly, but truly. They sat on the bench in the hallway. Outside the window, snow began to fall again, light and steady. In that cold, white silence, they sat side by side. No words, no touch. Just breathing in rhythm with the faint beep of the monitor down the hall. Adrian looked down at his hands, hands he'd once called instruments of logic. Now they were being held tightly by another, small, warm, human. And for the first time he realized, maybe hands weren't only made to save, maybe they were made to be held when you're scared. "Do you think hearts remember?" he asked softly. "Even when they stop beating?" Lena nodded, her gaze tender. "They don't forget. They just wait for someone brave enough to listen." He lowered his head, a faint smile breaking through. Simple words, yet enough to pull him back to earth, where fear and hope could coexist. Morning crept in, pale silver light spilling through the ICU window. A steady beep broke the quiet. Adrian jolted up. On the monitor, his mother's heart rhythm, slow but steady. He stepped to the glass, his hand trembling. Lena came beside him, touching his shoulder lightly. "She made it." He nodded, voice rough. "She did." He turned to her. His eyes, like thawing ice, held warmth again. "You stayed." "Of course," she said softly. "Someone had to make sure you didn't stop breathing too." He smiled, and for the first time it wasn't forced. Outside, morning light spread across the city. The gray clouds parted, revealing a faint wash of blue. Adrian reached for her hand, gently. "Let's go home," he said. She tilted her head, half smiling. "Who's home?" "Whichever one has music." She laughed quietly and leaned her head on his shoulder as they walked down the white corridor. Behind them, the monitor kept its steady rhythm, a thin, unwavering line, rising and falling like the breath of new love. That morning, the hospital seemed to breathe differently. Gone was the sterile scent of antiseptic. In its place lingered sunlight streaming through the windows, mingled with the faint aroma of herbal tea and the fragile chirping of birds outside the balcony. Room 6, 8th floor. A room once filled only with machines and silence was now flooded with light. The curtains were half drawn, sunlight spilling across the white wall, painting it in soft golden streaks like gentle fingers stroking old memories. On the bed lay Adrian's mother, her head resting on a high pillow. Her face was pale, but her eyes were open, lucid, peaceful. Beside her sat Lena, her hair neatly tied back, a small phone in her hand. From its speaker came the melody they had finished together the night before. The last train home. The violin began first, tender and light, like the breath of early spring. Then the piano followed, deep, grounded, cradling each note as if in an embrace. Mrs. Vale smiled faintly. It was a fragile smile, but it was her first in years. A smile that came not from lips, but from her eyes, from the quiet place where memory meets love. Elliot Moore, Lena whispered, wrote this during his last 6 months. Adrian helped me finish it. The woman nodded softly, afraid even her voice might disturb the fragile beauty filling the room. It's beautiful, she murmured, her voice hoarse but warm. There's light in it. Lena smiled. That's because it was written by someone who knew both darkness and grace. In the hallway outside, Adrian stood behind the glass wall, watching. He didn't dare enter right away, perhaps because the scene was too delicate. His mother smiling, sunlight resting on her silver hair. Lena sitting quietly beside the bed, her head tilted slightly with the rhythm of the song. It looked like a painting, one he was afraid would vanish the moment he opened the door. He leaned against the doorframe, his hand trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of emotion. In that still moment, he realized something he had avoided for years. He had been living like a shadow, running from the sound of flat lines, from failed surgeries, from the heartbreak of goodbyes never spoken. He hadn't been living, only existing between the echoes of code blue alarms, until she walked into his life, with a cup of coffee, a melody, and a light in her eyes that had forgotten how to believe. Lena turned, saw him standing there, and gestured softly. Come in. He drew a deep breath and opened the door. The music continued to play. His mother lifted her head, her eyes brightening as she saw him. Adrian, she whispered. You look tired. He smiled, voice thick. I am, Mom, but it's the good kind of tired. He moved to her bedside and sat down. Lena stepped back a little, giving them space. You scared me, he said quietly, squeezing her hand. And you scared yourself, she replied, smiling faintly. Always trying to fix what's broken, even when it's just life. He lowered his head, laughing through his tears. That's what I do best, remember? She shook her head gently. No, what you do best is care. Lena turned away, shoulders trembling slightly. Not from sorrow, but from something tender and wordless. By noon, the light grew brighter. Lena pulled the curtains wider, letting the air and sunlight fill the room. She set a small vase of lavender on the bedside table. Soft purple blooms, faintly sweet. Lavender, she said. Elliot used to say, it smells like peace. Mrs. Vale smiled. Then it suits this room perfectly. When Lena turned back, she saw Adrian watching his mother, his expression gentle, unguarded, utterly human. The sunlight touched them both, bathing the room in a warm golden hue, as if the space itself had learned how to breathe again. When the music reached its final note, Lena sat back down. He wrote the ending in silence, she said softly, not because it was unfinished, but because he said silence was where the heart finally rests. Adrian nodded, his gaze distant. Maybe that's what I was afraid of, he said quietly. Silence. She met his eyes, her tone steady and kind. You can't fix death, Adrian, she said, but you can heal the living. He looked at her for a long time, really looked, as if, for the first time, he finally understood. Not every life could be saved with a scalpel, and not every heart that stopped beating was truly gone. Some hearts just needed to be heard, to remember how to beat again. Outside, the afternoon light slanted through the window, casting long golden lines across the floor. On the table, the open sheet of the last train home fluttered in the breeze, the final page trembling softly, making a faint sound like breathing. Adrian smiled, not the tight, exhausted smile of a doctor after a long shift, but the quiet smile of a man who had finally forgiven himself. Lena sat beside him, her shoulder gently brushing his. Together they looked toward his mother, now asleep, a peaceful smile still lingering on her lips, her heart monitor beeping steadily and calmly. The light poured in, wrapping the room in warmth. It felt like the city had stopped being cold. It felt like both their hearts, after so much stillness, had finally remembered how to beat again. Not out of fear, but out of love. 1 year later, Chicago was in winter again, but this time the snow no longer felt cold like memory. The flakes outside the windows of the Symphony Center fell slowly, glittering under the golden lights, reflecting off the red velvet seats and the polished wood floor that shone like glass. Nearly 2,000 people filled the hall, yet when the lights dimmed, every voice fell silent. Only the sound of faint breathing remained, the rustle of coats, the quiet pulse of hearts waiting for something that went beyond music. On stage, Lena Moore stepped out. Her dress was black and simple, without a single sparkle, yet the lights made it flow like water. Her hair was tied low with a few loose strands brushing her neck, silvered by the stage light. She stood before the microphone, silent for a moment. Then she looked up, toward the audience. In the front row sat Adrian Vale, a black suit, loosened tie, his eyes focused yet softened. The gaze of a man who had learned to see life not through scars, but through light. Beside him sat his mother, thin but strong, a lavender scarf draped around her neck. Lena smiled faintly. Then she turned toward the orchestra and gave a small nod. The piano began, deep, steady, Adrian's own hands recorded in a studio months before. Then came the violin, clear, rising, like a soul lifting itself from the heavy snow of the past. The last train home, the completed version. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The music began not with sorrow, but with return. The opening notes still carried the scent of loss, like wind over a cemetery of memory, but soon the piano followed, gentle, like footsteps entering an old house and finding the light still there. Lena closed her eyes. With every stroke of the bow, she saw Elliot, her brother, standing at the back of the hall, smiling, nodding, as if saying, "Play it your way." Then the image faded back into the music. The piece was no longer a farewell. It was a promise, between those who had gone and those who stayed. When the melody reached its height, she opened her eyes and looked toward the front row. Adrian was watching her. No words, just the look of two people who had once walked through loss, who had once held hands in sterile hallways, and now stood together inside a melody no longer broken. "We both made it home," she whispered. Not into the mic, but just loud enough for herself to hear. The words melted into the sound carried by the trembling air through the vast hall. In the middle of the piece, the strings rose, a shimmering wave like the breath of melting glaciers. On the large screen behind her, an image appeared. Snow falling on the iron bridge, water gleaming beneath, two figures standing face to face in the white wind. That bridge, the place where everything began. The stage lights shifted from icy blue to warm gold. No one knew if it was lighting design or something more, but in that moment, everyone in the room felt it. A quiet message, wordless yet clear. That loss does not end life. It teaches us how to love deeper. In the front row, Adrian tilted his head back. A tear slid down his cheek, catching the light like crystal. He wasn't crying from grief, but from life itself. Lena drew the final note. The violin's voice stretched, trembled, and faded into silence. Absolute stillness. Even time seemed to listen to the final breath of the song, then like a tide returning. Applause. Soft at first, then swelling, crashing. A downpour of sound, of joy, of something sacred that people only find after losing too much. Lena stood there motionless. She didn't bow right away. She just looked to the front row, where Adrian had his hand over his heart and nodded gently. Between them there was no longer fear, only music, only light, only faith. After the concert, snow continued to drift along Michigan Avenue. People left quietly, as if afraid to break the spell that had just been cast. Lena stepped out through the stage door. The cold wind rushed in, swirling flakes around her. Adrian was already there. He said nothing, only held out a bouquet of lavender. "You brought the light back," he said softly. "We both did," she replied. "You just forgot how bright you could be." He laughed, then took her hand. Behind them, the theater still glowed its windows, reflecting the lights like 1,000 stars, and in each one of them, a story that never truly died. Morning in the suburbs of Chicago carried the color of peace. Sunlight filtered through the young maple leaves, scattering golden patches that danced across the wooden fence. In the distance, the sound of a train whistle echoed. Low, slow, like the steady breath of something ancient that refused to fade. The house they'd bought sat beside an old railway line, long out of service. A small white cottage with pale blue shingles, a wooden porch overflowing with lavender. Its windows looked out over the curve of the tracks, the very place once blanketed in snow where their story had begun. Now, wild grass grew along the rails, sunlight coating the rusted metal until it gleamed like a memory resting quietly beneath the passage of time. In the small kitchen, Lena brewed coffee. The grinder hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat. The scent filled the air, blending with the scent of pine wood and the crisp morning wind. She wore an oversized white shirt with its sleeves rolled up, and her hair was loosely tousled. Her face still showed traces of fatigue from the long concert tour, but her eyes were calm, the eyes of someone who had finally laid her past to rest and learned to look forward. Out in the backyard, Adrian was trimming dried lavender stems, his sleeves rolled up, sunlight flickering on his watch. He still worked at the city hospital, but on weekends, he always came back here, to their home. He once said, "Out here, I can hear my own heart better than the monitors." By noon, they sat together on the porch, coffee in hand, sunlight glinting through the trees. A freight train passed on the newer line beyond the hills, its wheels clattering against the rails, the sound no longer mournful, but familiar. Lena looked up, smiling softly. "Funny," she said, "I used to hate that sound." "And now," he asked, "now it feels like applause from the past." Adrian chuckled, a quiet, warm sound that dissolved into the breeze. She rested her head against his shoulder, her fingers brushing his wrist where the pulse beat steady and sure. "You know," he murmured, "the train never came that night." She turned slightly toward him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Because it was waiting for us to find it," she said. Their smiles met like sunlight crossing glass. Far away, the whistle sounded again, echoing through the valley, through memory, before fading into the endless blue. In the afternoon, Lena brought her violin onto the porch. She played, not for an audience, not for applause, but simply to live. The notes drifted through the air, blending with the rustle of leaves, the faint call of a train, and the soft tapping of dry branches against the porch roof. Adrian sat nearby, a medical journal in hand, though his eyes rarely left her. He was still a doctor, still saving lives. But now when the day ended, he came home as a man, not a machine. When she stopped playing, he said quietly, "You know what's strange? My hands used to shake after every surgery. Not from fear, from emptiness. I'd spend hours fixing hearts, but never feel my own." She set the violin down and moved closer to him. "And now? Now they still shake," he said with a small smile, "but for different reasons." She smiled too, taking his rough, warm hand in hers. "Then let them. It means they're alive." They sat there in silence, the late light brushing their faces, the wind whispering through the lavender. And somewhere far off, the faint metallic hum of the tracks rose again, once a haunting echo, now a rhythm beneath their peace. As twilight deepened, the sky turned from gold to lavender. Inside, Lena switched on the warm yellow lamps. The light spilled through the windows, dancing across the walls like a gentle echo of the room of light they once knew at the hospital. Adrian poured 2 cups of tea. Lena turned on their recording of the last train home. The melody filled the small house. No longer a requiem, but something reborn. It feels different now, she said. Because we finished it, he replied. She shook her head, smiling. No, because we lived it. Night settled in. Outside, the wind moved through the old tracks, carrying the scent of dried lavender and damp earth. Inside, a candle flickered atop the piano. She sat beside him, his hand resting on the keys, hers on the bow. They didn't need words. Music rose again. Soft, warm, no longer a farewell, but a beginning. A nameless melody, shaped not by notes, but by the rhythm of two hearts, parallel like the twin rails outside, never crossing, yet forever moving in the same direction. When the final note faded, Lena leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about that night? The train? The snow?" He nodded. "Every day, but not with regret. That night I thought the train would never come. Now I know. It was just waiting." She smiled faintly, eyes closing. "Waiting for us to find it." Outside, the distant whistle sounded again. Long, low, and warm, like an answer carried on the wind. In the little house by the tracks, the candle burned gently, its light reflecting on their faces. Two souls once lost, now finally home. 3 years had passed. Snow fell again outside the window. Soft, quiet, like the breath of memory. The little house by the railway was now draped in strands of dried lavender, hanging beneath the porch eaves, and every morning the whistle of passing trains echoed like winter's familiar greeting. Inside, warm light spilled from the kitchen, casting a golden glow across the wool rug and the violin resting in the middle of the room. Lena was teaching a young girl, about 10 years old, with curly hair and brown eyes, the violin slightly too big for her small arms. "Remember," Lena said gently, adjusting the girl's hand, "the violin doesn't make the music. You do. Just breathe, and let it speak for you." The girl nodded, focused. The bow touched the strings, shaky, uncertain. The notes off-key but honest, beautifully human. Lena smiled. Outside, a train rumbled in the distance, its sound melting into the child's uneven melody, like encouragement from another world. The door opened. Adrian stepped in, sleeves rolled up, holding a white envelope. He still carried the quiet exhaustion of a man who spent his life in hospitals, but his eyes were bright now, alive. "Mail," he said, voice hoarse from a long shift. Behind him toddled a little boy with tousled brown curls. Eli, 2.5, cheeks full, eyes sparkling like early spring. "Papa!" the boy cried, running into his arms. Adrian laughed, scooping him up, kissing his forehead. "Looks like someone missed me." "We both did," Lena said, smiling as she wiped her hands and came closer. "How was the hospital?" "Quiet for once." He raised the envelope. "But this isn't quiet at all." Lena frowned slightly. "What is it?" He opened the letter, pulling out a page marked with the National Conservatory seal. "They want to feature the last train home in the Winter Revival concert, national broadcast. They called it the Anthem of Healing." She froze. Snowlight from the window brushed across her face. Still, soft, moved. "After all these years," she whispered. Elliot would have smiled. Adrian looked at her, nodding. "He already did. Through you." She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. Eli, still in his arms, raised a tiny finger as if to agree. "Mama, play." "Yes, baby," she said, hugging him. "Mama will play." That afternoon, Adrian's mother came to visit. She was still fragile, moving slowly, but her eyes were bright. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her head. "It smells like home in here," she said, stepping inside and inhaling deeply. "That's probably lavender and burnt toast," Adrian chuckled. She smiled, her hand gliding gently over the piano keys. "Still playing?" "Still trying," he replied. Lena set a teacup before her. "He's better than he admits." "He always was," his mother said with a soft laugh. "He just needed the right duet partner." The afternoon light filled the room, painting everything in a warm gold. 3 generations wrapped in quiet contentment. Eli sat on the floor, stacking wooden blocks, occasionally glancing up to smile before returning to his masterpiece. No one spoke of the past. No one needed to. It was still there, but now it had become part of the foundation, like old tracks that no longer led anywhere, except to sunlight. Night fell. Snow blanketed the roof, and the gray Chicago sky shimmered with that strange half-light the city wore, somewhere between solitude and peace. In the living room, Adrian and Lena sat together on the long wooden bench. Their son slept in the crib by the window. Lena rested her head on his shoulder, fingers interlaced with his. Outside, a train passed. Its sound no longer screamed through the cold. It was rounded, steady, warm, the sound of a heart beating peacefully again. Steam rose from the engine, drifting up into the streetlights like threads of silver fog. "We never really missed the train," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes tender. "No," he said softly. "We became it." Lena looked up. The reflection of the porch light gleamed in his eyes, small but steadfast. She smiled, that quiet kind of smile born from gratitude and love. "Then let's keep moving," she said. "Wherever the tracks lead." He nodded, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Outside, the train's whistle stretched into the night, whoo, then faded slowly, melting into the snowy wind. And somewhere beyond the tracks, where memory met peace, another song began, not of farewell, but of homecoming.